Imagine waking up covered in dust, sweat, horsehair, and something unidentifiable from last night's chili. You stretch, crack your neck, pull on the same shirt you wore for the past 3 weeks, and that's it. That's your morning routine. Because if you were a cowboy, a trapper, or just an unlucky soul living in the Old West, bathing wasn't part of your daily schedule, that it was barely part of your yearly one. Soap was a luxury. Water was worse. Bathing in the 1800s wasn't just rare, it was a logistical nightmare. Most towns didn't have running water. You wanted a bath, you had two choices: haul it in bucket by bucket, heat it over a fire, and hope the wind didn't turn it cold again. Head to the river, strip down, and pray there weren't snakes, leeches, or someone upstream dumping dishwater. Soap, when it existed, was homemade, often lye-based, gritty, and strong enough to peel paint. One cowboy said it smelled like boiled socks and burned bacon. And if you ran out, you didn't replace it. You just used sand, or ashes, or urine. Yes, urine. The once-a-month bath. If that bathing once a month wasn't the standard, it was the gold. In winter, forget it. The water was freezing, and the firewood was saved for cooking and warmth, not heating a wash basin. Even when baths were taken, it wasn't like in the movies. You didn't have a full tub in a quiet room. You had a tin wash tub behind a curtain in the kitchen, maybe, and that same water got shared between 5 people, in descending order of social rank or luck. By the time the youngest kid got in, it was more soup than bath. Sweat was the default. Scent. Cowboys didn't wear cologne. They wore sweat, smoke, and horse. After a week on the trail, your shirt stuck to your skin like bark. Your hat was crusted with salt. From your forehead, your boots smelled like old cheese, and river mutined your pants. Don't ask. People learned to ignore the smell because everyone smelled. Visitors from the East often wrote in journals that the air itself seems ripe. One woman described a dinner party where the roast was pleasant, but the guests were unbearable. The clothes never got a break. You might think, well, maybe they washed their clothes. Sometimes, but not often. Water was too precious, soap even more so. And washing a full set of clothes meant you'd have to stand around naked while it dried, which wasn't ideal in towns full of drunk men, stray dogs, and dust storms. So most people wore the same thing for days, weeks. They brushed it off, beat it against rocks, sprinkled ash in it to cut the grease, or just let the rain do the job. One cowboy famously said, "If you can't smell me, I must be dead." Bonus tip: ashes and urine. If you were desperate, you'd turn to old tricks. Wood ashes sprinkled in the hair to absorb oil, urine used to wash clothes or treat foot fungus, lard rubbed on skin to seal in the freshness. Spoiler: it didn't. There's documented proof of settlers boiling clothes in urine because it helped lift grease and odor. Afterwards, they hung it to dry and hoped for the best. Nobody complained out loud. The best part: nobody said a word. Why? Because they smelled just as bad, and complaining about someone else's stench only brought attention to your own. Instead, they coughed, turned their heads, or took another swig of whiskey to kill the scent from the inside. Let's say you were lucky. You made it to a town big enough to have a real bathhouse, brick building, tin sign, a man out front yelling prices. You think, finally, a proper bath. Wrong. You walk in, pay your coins, usually about 25 to 50 cents, which in cowboy money was a small fortune, and then they show you to the tub. What you see is enough to make you dirtier just looking at it. The shared water special bathhouses weren't built on luxury, they were built on efficiency, which meant one tube-on water source, multiple customers. If you were first, congratulations, you got clean water. If you were second, you got lukewarm soap stew. If you were third or fourth, you were basically bathing in other people's stories. And no, they didn't drain it each time. They added more hot water, maybe scooped out some floating things, and hoped you wouldn't notice. One traveler wrote, "The man before me was generous with his dirt. I nearly drowned in it." Tools of the trade. You didn't get a towel. You didn't get fresh soap. You got a rag that had seen too much, a hunk of hard soap with other people's hairs stuck to it, a wooden bucket with dents, and maybe, just maybe, a broken comb. Hot water was carried in by hand, usually by a kid or a man who judged you silently the whole time. Cold water came from a barrel, often full of dead flies and mosquito larvae. You washed quick, you rinsed quicker, and you tried not to think about what touched your leg underwater. The public tubs in towns had what they proudly called the public tub. This wasn't luxury. It was a wooden barrel or iron vat, sometimes outside, sometimes in a barn-like structure with walls that didn't quite close. And yes, everyone used it. Some bathed in groups, others took turns. But either way, the water went from clear to murky in 10 minutes, and it stayed that way until the end of the day. And when it was drained right into the street. One cowhen said, "You could tell bath day by the color of the mud out front." Ladies went elsewhere. Some of the mespething for women was trickier. Some had private tubs brought to their boarding houses. Others used copper wash tubs in the kitchen. And some didn't bathe at all, instead relying on perfumed oil-spouted chalk and the power of distance other. Are accounts of saloon girls sprinkling dried flowers into old bathwater just to mask the stench. Others washed only their faces, and hence calling it a refreshing. One letter described a woman applying rosewater to her skin while wearing a dress that hadn't been washed in 2 years. The smell was baked in, and here's the thing, even if you bathed, even if you scraped, scrubbed, and soaked in boiling vinegar, the smell stayed. It was in your clothes, your boots, your hat, your blankets, your saddle, your tent, even your hair, especially if it hadn't been cut since last spring. People didn't just stink from dirt. They fermented in layers of sweat, smoke, animal hair, cooking grease, and dust. You couldn't undo that with one tub. You could only lighten it. Temporarily. The myth of clean in the West. Clean didn't mean what it means today. It meant you didn't have visible blood, your shirt wasn't crawling, you didn't smell like a full outhouse, and Julie thought was clean. That was good enough. Because once you stepped back into the dust, the saddle, and the sweat of a day on the range, you were dirty again before your boots hit the porch. Let's talk about the real reason the West stank. It wasn't just the lack of baths. It was what they wore and what they didn't do to clean it. Because even if you skipped a bath, you could still wash your clothes, right? Wrong. That was often the last thing anyone ever did. Laundry was a nightmare. First off, washing clothes by hand was brutal. You needed buckets of water, hard lye soap, a washboard if you were lucky, and half a day of scrubbing, wringing, and drying. And you couldn't just toss clothes in and relax. You had to beat them with rocks, boil them in iron pots, rinse, and twist until your hands went raw. No, imagine doing that on a cattle drive, in the desert, with 10 other men watching. Exactly, it didn't happen. Clothes were rare and expensive. Echo boys didn't have closets full of shirts. They had one good shirt, maybe 2, jeans, same pair for months, underwear, if they had any. It was more patch than fabric after a few weeks. Most clothes were made of wool, canvas, lethal materials that didn't wash well, dried slow, and smelled awful when damp. So instead of cleaning them, they aired them out, or beat the dust off with a stick, or just ignored the stench altogether. The smell of a hat. You could tell a cowboy's story by his hat. You could also tell what he'd eaten, where he'd slept, and whether or not he'd survived a stampede. Because hats weren't washed ever. They absorbed sweat, train, blood runs, whatever you rubbed on your hair. To make it stay down, they were so stained and stiff they could stand up. By themselves, some cowboys used their hats as pillows, water scoops, fly swatters, and stew bowls, often on the same day. One drifter claimed he could smell a man's hat before he saw him. Pants you never touch. Headpants were worse. You wore them until they fell apart. If they got wet, you let them dry. If they got muddy, you scraped the worst off with a knife. But wash them? Almost never. Some men tied twine around the cuffs to keep mice from nesting in them at night. Others used saddle blankets as makeshift towels and wore the same trousers from one season to the next, patched, stained, and hardened by layers of sweat and dust. One newspaper visitor wrote, "The cowboys' trousers appeared to be made of old bark and smelled about the same." Boots held secrets. Boots weren't just footwear. They were portable swamps. You'd ride all day, sweat pouring into your socks, then take your boots off at night and hear a sound like wet bread being pulled apart. And inside, toenails you forgot. About 6 that could walk off on their own, maybe a coin or a crushed scorpion. You hadn't noticed that boots never got washed. You just hoped the stink faded by morning. Spoiler, it didn't. You got used to it, or you didn't at some point. The clothes and the man became one. He smelled like his boots. His boots smelled like the trail. The trail smelled like everything that wasn't soap. But they didn't mind, because clean was for Sundays, or for the rich, or for someone who hadn't been knee-deep in cattle. Since sunup dot, and if someone did smell nice, people got suspicious. If you couldn't take a bath, and your clothes hadn't touched water since the last lunar eclipse, what did you do? You faked it, because on the frontier, cleanliness was an illusion, and cowboys, barkeeps, and ladies of the saloon had their tricks. Some worked, most didn't. All of them smelled unique. Vinegar was the go-to fix you spilled stew on your shirt. 3 days ago, sweat soaked through your hatband. Boots full of swamp, splash on some vinegar. Vinegar was the cure-all of the West. It was used for disinfecting, wounds, cleaning, pan-soothing, insect bits, and deodorizing. Everything. Cowboys poured it into wash basins and wiped their pits with a rag. Others gargled it, hoping to kill 2 problems with one burn. Did it help? Kinda. But now you smelled like sour feet dipped in salad dressing. Still, better than nothing. Smoke. Showers. Fire cured everything. Couldn't wash your clothes. Hang them over the campfire. Couldn't wash yourself. Stand in the smoke. This wasn't some ritual. It was a real technique. Smoke helped dry out sweet, kill lice, sometimes mask body odor, and give you that freshly roasted. Finishmen would wave smoke under their arms, hold their hats over the coals, and sometimes even roast their boots to dry out the worst of the funk. One cowboy claimed a fire cured his shirt's smell. His buddy said, "No, it just smells like burnt shirt now." Perfume for the desperate. Not all perfume was sweet. Not all perfume was perfume. Saloon workers used whiskey dabbed behind the ears, floral water. If you could get it, ship it, or even cologne made from cedar oil and crushed herbs. Problem was, it didn't cover the smell. It just added to it. So instead of soap and roses, you got whiskey and feet cheddar and old meat, lavender, and something that died last week. Own traveler said the local madam smelled like moonshine spilled on a fur coat left in the sun. Powder, chalk, and hope when things got bad, and they always did. Folks reached for powder. Not the clean kind, the dusty kind. They used chalk to soak up grease, fleur as deodorant, baking soda, and boot talcum powder anywhere. Skin rubbed raw. It worked for a few hours until it didn't. Then it just blended with the sweat, creating a gritty paste no one talked about. But hey, white armpits meant you tried. Teeth and breath. Don't ask. Dental hygiene was optional. Brushing was rare. Toothpaste was homemade and tasted like sand. Instead, folks chewed sage leaves, licorice root, clovisher, colody freshened the breath for a minute and then wore off, leaving behind smoke, onions, and regret. Many cowboys had missing teeth by 30. Not from fights, from rot. You smelled it before you saw it. Social distance. 1800s edition. The only real way to deal with the smell. Space. People didn't crowd each other. Not because they were polite, because they were self-aware. If you got too close, noses turned. Conversation ended. Church benches had room. So did poker tables. And if someone was to clean, folks assumed he was hiding something, was new, or he just took a bath, which was weird and suspicious. Stink was normal. The lack of it, now that was cause for concern. Final truth. You didn't smell it anymore. Over time, you stopped noticing. Your nose gave up. Your brain adjusted. People didn't live in filth because they liked it. They lived in it because it was all they knew. And when bath day came, once a month, if ever, they scrubbed until the water turned black. Then they dried off, dressed in the same old clothes, and started the whole process over again. Final line. Because in the Old West, dirt didn't just stick to skin. It became part of who you were.